Hello, Goodman Games fans. We are here for another episode of the Scrivenery. I'm Ed Stanek, as usual, and these are our co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Trevor Stamper, and
today we've got a special guest host who's joining us, and this is popularly known Goodman Games artist Bradley McDevitt.
Okay. Also, just call me Brad.
Very well.
I'm only Bradley if I'm getting yelled at by my boss or my wife.
So be it. So today we're focusing the entire episode on getting artwork so as to include it in your publication. And there's of course some different layers to this, and we're going to take them each one at a time. So the first thing I wanted to touch on before we dig into the hows and wherefores and so forth, I follow a group on Facebook called D&D Fantasy Art, which is a great group if you want. That's a great place to find artists. But one thing that I observe there as a spectator is there are artists who periodically talk about, relatively often enough, they run into people who expect that their art should be free. I think this kind of comes down to a lot of people have this notion that anything that I don't know how to do can't be all that complicated, and so therefore it's not a big deal. Well, then do it yourself. And or you hear sometimes people say, well, you could do it for the sake of the exposure that you'll get. Yeah, because your little podunk publication is really going to be something that rockets this person's career. So I want to emphasize, and I believe our program would want to emphasize the yeah, exposure. Yeah, exactly. But that's a real thing that's heard. The worker is worth their pay. Artists produce a craft that is a very important part of what we do. And while artwork may or may not sell your piece, I believe it absolutely drives traffic. It drives people to look at your piece, and it helps people immerse into the feeling of and the emotion of your piece. These things are all very important. So don't try to cheat the or insult the artist by feeling like they don't deserve to be paid for their work. That being said, so there are two, broadly speaking, two basic categories in terms of securing artwork. There's art that's already out there and that's existing that you're going to try to get a hold of, or you may get a custom work made by commissioning an artist. So for existing work, one of the things that some people perhaps aren't aware of is there is some artwork that actually is freely available because the artists have made it such. This is called public domain. Now, there are various ways that you can find public domain artwork or photographs. In some cases, you can, and some of the things that are available that are seen on Wikipedia articles are public domain. Some are not. You have to be very careful. Look at the licensing that's associated with whatever the visual the artwork or photograph is. Sometimes you come across something called the Creative Commons license. Mm-hmm. It's very important to know that there are different variations of this. Just because something is Creative Commons does not mean that you're free to do whatever you want with it. And so make yourself familiar with this. I'm going to paste into the chat link. Wikipedia has some reference about Creative Commons.
So beyond Creative Commons, there's obviously copyright issues at play, and one of the things you can do if you don't understand if something is public domain or whether or not you can utilize it is seek out professional help. Right, a copyright lawyer can help you ascertain whether something is truly free to use, and if it's not free to use, can probably help you negotiate how to use it if you need to. If the creator is still alive, you can always reach out to them and try and get a license directly from them. And many creators have licenses on hand they're willing to share with you. But if you need to find a lawyer, you can always look for your local or state bar association. We actually have a link here for the Cincinnati Bar Association. And this is a lawyer referral service beyond being a bar association. And they'll help you find the exact type of lawyer you need and put you in touch with them. And that can be a really useful thing. There are different bar associations for each state and often for major cities. So look in your local area. We're just giving you one example here. There are places you can go, though, online to actually find licensable art, things that are clearly not public domain. And we have a couple of examples of websites like that. We have needpix.com. Is that Pixels?
Actually, those first two are public domain artwork, or at least everything.
Okay.
Or let me be careful with that, because public domain means something very specific. Rather, I will say the stuff that is on those two sites, Needpix and Pixels, is available for use for free.
There's also a website There's also a website that I've used sometimes called openclipart.org.
I just pasted that into the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have some samples, right, Ed? Something we can show people.
Sure. So if we could have graphic A1. So this is something that I got, I believe it was from Needpix. I used it in the PAX Lex book. It's a photograph of, as you can see, an ancient Egyptian statue. Sometime one of the things that we did for some of our books is we took photographs and we ran them through a graphic filter to make them look like a painting. So that gave them a little bit more of a historicity kind of feel. And then go on to 1B. This was a couple of public domain clip arts that I grabbed and merged together to do a graphic for use again in the PAX Lex book, the sword and the scroll. So these are just some examples of some of the kind of things that you can run across on these free sites. As well, graphic 1C. And this was just some of these things too make very nice, especially the stuff that you can find for free. It's nice to put in the bottom of a page, side of a page, or whatever, that just to help kind of spice up the page a little bit. So it's not just the text. This was a graphic that we used in the Celts book.
I like to do a lot of, like, sometimes they just call that stuff watermarks. That maybe, 20% opacity, so it doesn't interfere with the legibility of the text. It just kind of, spiffs up the page design a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, and I make use of some of that as well. We'll cover it later, but we've used some of the Dover Art Series clip art, which come in physical form and now in digital form as well. And then, even though those are non-vectored art, you can quickly take them into something like Illustrator and vectorize them so you can use them in different formats, which is really great. And everything. There are lots of other places we could get stock art, though, right? Other than these open source locations. One of the ones that everybody is probably thinking about is Drive-Thru-RPG, right? As a matter of fact, Brad, you're an expert of putting clip art up on our Drive-Thru-RPG. What can you tell us about that process?
It's fairly simple. You just get an account. I was actually really lazy, and I already had a friend who was had an account that was a publisher, and I just, hey, why don't we start doing this clip art? It actually started because a client had kind of forgotten to pay me for the piece. Turned out later on that her company just went out of business before she ever got even to pay me. And it's like, okay, I have this piece of artwork sitting here. Hey, do you want to sell it as clip art? Sure, why not? And then it's like, oh, no, if I can do it for this piece, I've got this, stuff that I've done for companies that are long out of business or only bought, first rights usages and such. And now I think I'm almost to 660.
That is awesome.
Nice.
Eric Lofgren also has them. Storm Cook, Will McAusland also that does a lot of work for Goodman, also has an Outland Arts that has just like little pieces of stock art that you can drop in anywhere on a page. It's just a matter of looking around at, looking for stock art at drive-through.
Yeah, and the link that I posted up, if you click on that link, it'll actually take you not just to drive-through, but specifically searching in the category of fantasy art. So it excludes the print publications and such like that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, clip art is a wonderful resource. If you need a couple of skeletons or a couple of zombies and you don't really care that, they don't have to be personalized. Brad, you probably have like 100 skeletons, I bet, or zombies, which seems to be kind of your forte.
Zombies, lots of them. Not so much skeletons because they're a pain in the tailbone to draw.
Yeah.
No,
you can also go to places like istockphoto.com, where you can license art from there. And as a matter of fact, there are other resources as well. You can go to places like adobe.com has a marketplace for vectored art if you need borders or graphics or things like this. Sometimes I go on there looking for lines that look like they're drawn by a specific specific style, right? And you're looking for something very specific, and literally you can get unlimited licensing on usage on 150 lines or something for $20, and so it depends on what you're looking for, but there are plenty of places to find kind of just stock art. We have some examples of that, I think, right? Ones we've all used.
Sure. Yeah, and before I bring these up, one of the pros or the primary pro with these stock arts, like Trevor was alluding to, you can get a really great deal because the artist is selling these any number of times. So the downside is it's not going to be unique to your work. It may be in a number of other publications, but if you don't care, that's fine. And you can find some really great, especially again on drive-through, you're going to get stuff that's particularly oriented around fantasy publications. So these are really great places to get some good material. So let's start with 2A. This was actually a graphic that I got off of iStock. Really nice gladiator picture. He used it for the cover of We Who Are About to Die. And then 2B is a picture that, or a graphic that I got off of drive-through, just as an example. And we're going to bring up now some of Brad's material that he's got on drive-through as examples of some of the other stuff that you can get there. So let's look at 2C. And then if you just kind of go in cascading to D, E, F, G, and H.
I mean, who doesn't need an ink and temple for their zine, right? Everybody.
Oh, that reminds me, there's one huge advantage with using stock art also, as opposed to what we'll get to eventually, which is custom art. You know exactly what you're getting.
Exactly, yes.
There are times when if you commission a specific piece, the artist, for any whatever reason, may not be up to the job. But for example, if you need a picture of a panther and you go to 655, boom, that's the artwork you're going to be getting.
Right.
There's no suspense of like, this wasn't quite what I actually wanted.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not a matter of whether they're up to the task. It could just be they may have a different vision of what it's supposed to look like, and you get it, you're like, it just doesn't evoke the feel that I was looking for. But yeah, exactly. The stock art, this is exactly what I'm going to get, and it takes away the time element. It's ready right now. Cool. And so you don't have to worry about, is this artwork going to be ready by the time I need it in order to put it into the publication.
Not 2 weeks, not 4 weeks, not 6 weeks. Basically, as soon as you swipe that credit card effectively, boom, it's in your inbox and ready to use.
Right.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. As a matter of fact, Sometimes I've reached out to Brad on a couple of his stock art pieces and only wanted to use a part of a piece of stock art. Like if you look at Graphic 2C again, with the Ink and Temple, if you didn't want to have those adventurers coming through that door and you want it to be dark, right? That's a fairly quick manipulation that doesn't require a lot of effort, either on Brad's part if you want to pay him a little more for it, or you can go into a program and erase it. I mean, so
Yeah.
I think Brad, the specific one that you and I talked about was an Elder Things, star-shaped head, and I needed just that, and so we were thinking about using that
I
in a
don't even
graphic.
remember that conversation.
Yeah, and so the great thing about working with clip art and working with the artist is you can go in and sometimes just use a part of it and get a lot more impact for what you're looking for. You don't have to use necessarily the whole thing.
And that's usually in the license, you know.
And each one of these, if I believe, downloads a license, especially like through drive-through. You download a license file in addition to the actual piece of art file, and the license file, basically outlines how that artist is willing to let you work with it and everything.
Yeah, and generally there's a summary of that in the posting, so you can see before you buy, what am I free to do?
Yeah, and this can go further. I mean, sometimes I look on Instagram, and there's a couple of artists who I follow, and there was one artist in specific whose name I forget at the moment, but she had this multi-headed kind of rat god with lots of tails coming out of it and everything, and the piece was really striking. And I reached out to the author, and I was like, or the artist, and I was like, I'd really like to license this because I think it would be perfect as a cover illustration for a patron that I was looking at working on that had to do with rats and stuff. And she was more than willing to go ahead and generate up a license right then and there for that piece of art. A couple other areas that I'd like to bring your attention to. If you look at 2i, this is a downloadable digital package that you can actually get off Amazon, but you actually get it in physical format as well, called Skulls and Anatomy. And these are all essentially outside of copyright date, 18th and 17th century illustrations, scientific illustrations mainly, of skeletal anatomy in many different forms. And so if you need just a zygomat, or you need just a couple of phalanges or something, that's got it there. They also have the skeletons in context in broader illustrations, and you can go in and again delete the background and just use that skeleton if you want to. There's a lot of different things you can do with this art, and so you should really consider that. If we look at Graphic 2J, this is Dover Art's Celtic stencil designs. These are perfect for literally laying on a scanner and scanning in and then vectorizing and stuff. So again, this is I think $4.95 is what I paid for the book. There's about 180 different Celtic designs in it that are actually, the reason why it's called stencil designs is they're originally rubbed off of actual physical stones and things like this and everything. So these are definitely real Celtic designs that have been taken off stencils and then cleaned off. If we look at Graphic 2K, this is an example. It does say copyright on it, but that's because that's the Amazon website preview. I didn't go and scan mine own in, but as you can see, this is a really nice, clean black and white illustration that's easy to manipulate and everything. So you can do a lot with that kind of stuff. And so you should consider these. The great thing that I find with those is you get the digital files, but you also get a physical book. And so I have a growing library of these. They come in Celtic and Egyptian themed and Norse themed and Aztec and things like that. And these are books that I have on my shelf that I often reference back to when I'm thinking about. Actually, I use them for inspiration sometimes when I'm writing articles, right? So they have a broader use life than just as a piece of clip art. And it's great to have those physical things if you have space for them.
Just make sure if you're using taking from a physical production, that the license that's around that is appropriate for you to be able to take a piece from it and use it in your publication.
Absolutely.
Always read the fine print.
Yes. Okay, so next category, whether you consider yourself an artist or not, and I absolutely do not consider myself an artist, but there are some tools that you can use in order to make some of your own stuff. And one of my favorite tools in that regard, which I'm going to post into the chat right now, is Campaign Cartographer. This is a program for map making that is specifically designed around RPGs and making maps for RPGs and such. And by Pro Fantasy. And so if we could see graphic 3A, just as an example, this is a map that I did that's a dungeon map for in one of my modules. And then 3B is an overland map that's used in one of our books, the Pack Selects book. And so you can make some pretty nice quality maps with this in different styles. I have, the style that I produce in, but you can make them to look in all kinds of different styles. And then 3C, the same company makes a snap-on for Campaign Cartographer called Character Artist, which you can use to make some fairly basic and yes, predictable and kind of like paper doll kind of stuff. But characters, including some basic monsters. This one is obviously a Lamia, and but some being that I'm not an artist, this gave me a way that I could slap together a decent picture of the creature that I wanted, or in some cases the when I make pre-gen characters, great way to make a pre-gen picture or a portrait of a character. And if I'm not terribly concerned that it look unique, yeah, it's good for those purposes.
Yeah, very clean and illustrative. I mean, sometimes you just need to illustrate what you're looking at. It doesn't need to be built for drama or anything, right? Brad, I think when we were talking before the show, you mentioned a website called Incarnate. I just put the link in the, or we could just put the link in the show notes here for you. But could you talk about that a bit? What?
I actually don't know that much about it. I didn't have a chance to get in contact with my friend and ask her about it, but she has posted some very elaborate maps that she's created using it. But I kind of get the impression from the glance that it's mostly just for like online gaming. So I don't know whether it's really useful. I think that's why I didn't really bother reaching out to her too much, because it's like, I don't think this is actually going to be relevant to, the topic that we're dealing with.
So on the subject of making your own maps, you can always make them physically, right? And as a matter of fact, there's a great resource. I happen to have it sitting right here because I'm sitting inside my little art booth. This is called Fantasy Art and RPG Maps, How to Draw. It's by Jared Blando, and you can find it online. And it has a wealth of information of how to basically build up from simple line shapes, fantasy maps that are fully serviceable, either for your online games or your zines. It's a wonderful resource. I keep it right there, and often I sit there, and when I've got a little bit of a break, I'll sit there and practice them. And as a matter of fact, there's another tool that I use that with. If you could pull up 3D, Image 3D is actually a screenshot of a small British village. I think it's called Boxall, if I remember correctly. And I have a friend. I lived in England for several years as a kid, and I got a buddy who lived there as well. And one of the things we're looking for is authentic looking villages, right? And there are plenty of pristine little villages that really haven't changed much in Europe. And so what I often do is sometimes go through Google Maps looking for little villages like this, and I'll take a screenshot of it and use that for inspiration for laying my roads and things like this. And I might look for very specific features. I didn't include an image for us to talk about today, but I've often used fjords from Norway to get a nice steep incline and to show you how those roads kind of, belt back and forth and everything and switch back and stuff. And it's a really great tool, especially if you've got, a light table or something, and you can quickly get the main parameters down, and then you can begin building your unique stuff on top of it. So a wonderful resource looking at actual real world things.
We have a
Um,
question in the chat asking if Brad does any map creation.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have a job where I have to do a map of the island of Wight sitting up in my inbox right now.
Awesome. Very cool.
So, yeah, I've already hit the various places to find a picture of a map of at least the outline and general locations, and there you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
So now the other thing you can do, moving away from maps a little bit, is you can work from your own photos. I've got a little bit of experience in this. We'll pull up some samples in just a minute. But often I visit museums or field sites. Sometimes my work takes me to Europe, and I will go and go to an actual castle or a location.
Well, it must be rough.
Yeah, it's a hard life sometimes. But you don't have to go all the way to Europe. You can often go to the museums in your area. For instance, here in Cincinnati, Ed, I don't know if you caught it. There was a wonderful Mayan art exhibit that came through town early last
Went
year.
there. Me and my
Yeah.
Mayan son went there.
Yeah, and so I mean, I took hundreds of photos from multiple angles. I'm working on a frog related kind of atmospheric piece right now, and there were tons of great examples of frog art and everything there. And so you know, wherever you can get inspiration, whether it's in the museum or a field site, you know, Serpent Mound is just a couple of miles from us and things. So you can go there and actually get the photos of real places.
Loveland Castle.
Yeah, you can get a castle, right? If you can pull up graphic 3E, this, as a matter of fact, is a photograph of a tile that sits in the floor in an antechamber in Westminster Abbey, like 20 feet from the oldest door in England,
How
which
cool
is
is that?
known to be over like 1800 years old, right? So this is part of the floor tile. Now, nobody owns the copyright to it. You know, it's made by somebody who's long dead, and I took a photo of it so that I could then go in and trace on it, much like that Dover Celtic art, and I could pull certain elements out of it. I happen to be really interested in the griffins in this case, and so I have dozens of these. So when I go to places that have interesting features, I take photos of them wherever I am. And all of you, I'm pretty sure, have your cell phone. Mine is packed with photos from trips, and they don't have to be, you know, to exotic locales. You can find some pretty cool stuff just looking at modern architecture, or, you know, architecture from the last 200 years here in the United States. The other thing you can do, if you lack a physical, real model you can work with, you can build a model or a mock-up, and then you can position yourself at the angle you want to take and build that illustration, and take a photo of it, and then simply trace over that. And while that sounds really cheesy, I'd like to point out that David Peterson, the gentleman who created and writes and draws Mouse Guard, has an entire YouTube sub portion of his channel devoted to these mock-ups. He builds models for his complicated like interior abbey shots, and then as the mice move through the abbey, he will literally move through just like a little movie camera and take photos of the exact orientation he wants to draw, and then he'll lay that down and he'll trace it, and then he'll add his details to it. But it allows him to create with just some cardstock and balsa wood, really elaborate mock-ups that cost pennies, and that he can use time and time again. And so, you know, that's just a trick, right? You know, there isn't a huge amount of skill in that other than cutting some balsa wood and using glue, but it's pretty awesome. I've got a couple other examples. Actually, if you look at 3F, this is an example of a plate that I found in the Scottish Museum of Art, of a dragon eating its own tail. And so, if I remember correctly, it was like 17th century. And if we go to graphic 3G, this happens to be a bat god altar that was at that Mayan exhibit that Ed and I went to. And so I must have taken a dozen photos of this, because it was really cool, and stuff. So these types of things I take photos of, I use them for inspiration. But sometimes, you know, I will send them to an artist if I'm like, look, I'm thinking about this feeling this is kind of where I'm going, and or where I'd like to see you move towards, and just to give inspiration. So there's plenty of this type of stuff that's available for you as well. So lots of examples of stock art, or the way to create art from everyday encounters. What else have we got?
All right, so moving on to the next rung up the ladder, if you will, would be unique pieces. And again, broadly speaking, there's two categories here. You can find an existing work that's out there, and Trevor already gave an example of a case where he had done that. Or you can look to commission a work. Now, I'm a big believer of trying to find existing artwork, and I've done this numerous times. If we could bring up graphic 4A, for example, there are. We'll give some examples and some links of where you can go to find artwork. This was a piece that I found on an artist site, and what I needed a Roman guy in an Egyptian setting, and there it was. So I contacted the artist, said, hey, I'd like to use this in a module of mine. Would you consider granting me license for a limited use? We came to an agreement on a cost, and boom, there, got it. And then graphic 3B, likewise, I was doing some searching for Celtic. I'm sorry, 4B. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. I was looking for something that evoked a Celtic kind of feel for the cover of that book, and I came across this, and I just felt like this is gorgeous. I love this. So I contacted the artist. Would you consider selling license so I could use this on a book? She said, yeah, I'm too busy to do a commission thing, but yeah, I can sell you usage right for that. And again, similar to stock art, there's a couple of benefits. One, you see it right now, and so you know exactly what you're getting. And you can get it now or soon. There's generally a little bit of time, because you're not just buying it off a website. You're going to negotiate a price with the artist. And typically, it's going to be more affordable than a commission piece, because this is something that they've already done. They're not sinking new time into it. And so you can save some money there. But for me, the biggest appeal is I see exactly what I'm going to be getting. And so I know that it's going to fit my bill. I'm going to post up a few places that I've found as sources. ArtStation and DeviantArt are both good websites. And like I'd mentioned before, there is a Facebook group that I follow called D&D Fantasy Art, which is a great group to follow. And multiple times a day, artists will post up, hey, here's my stuff. And it gives you a chance to see, oh, I like their style. I would really like to commission them to do such and such piece. And so it gives you a mechanism to make contact with an artist that has the kind of style that you want to go after. So in the process of doing this approach, whether you're reaching out for a commission or an existing piece, you got to understand this is going to be more expensive than stock art. This is not something that they're selling numerous times, most likely. And there's going to be a wide range of prices that are going to be dependent on a lot of factors, including what the experience level that artist is, whether this is a full-time thing for them or maybe more of a hobby, what their skill level is, whether the nature of the work, is it just a line drawing versus a fully colored and shaded piece. And so these things will all influence that price. And so you might need to look around and see what's appropriate for you.
But it's still going to be a lot less than if you just could, like, hey, can you do this picture for me?
Yeah, and I think it's really useful to put this in context. I mean, looking for art that inspires you and reaching out and seeing if you can use it in your publication. I mean, that's for people with all sorts of budgets, right? I mean, it's not just somebody who's trying to produce a zine on a very low budget. I want you to think about it this way. Peter Jackson, when he was developing Lord of the Rings, right, which is celebrating its anniversary this year, but in pre-production, he kept referencing Alan Lee's artwork again and again and again, and they hadn't hired Alan Lee yet. And that's actually what led them to work with Lee, was that they were using so many of Lee's pieces. Jackson said in an interview that it was just a natural extension that they contact the artist eventually and say, look, can you move here for apparently 2 decades and come work with us, right? And so I mean, if it works for Peter Jackson on $100 million budget, there's no reason why it's not going to work for your zine that maybe on a $100 or a $200 budget, right? This is something that everybody uses. We all reach out and look for inspiration. You can't see the booth I'm sitting in, but I've got 2 original Stefan Pogues and some Bernie Wrightsons here, and I look at those all the time, and sometimes just get lost in them, looking for inspiration and stuff. So this is the same type of thing as zipping around on DeviantArt, looking for art that's going to inspire you to do that perfect, Celtic module. So yeah, absolutely. I think we've got a couple other examples of us reaching out and about existing art pieces, right? Ed, did you just go through 4A and 4B?
I did. That's yeah.
Okay, so then you can move on from all of this kind of licensing and pre-existing art, and you can move to what is bespoke art, right? This is art that is crafted specifically for you. I mean, really, while Brad does a lot of clip art and stock art, your bread and butter is exactly this, right? I mean, you are a bespoke artist. Everything that you're doing for Goodman Games and other game publishers. I mean, Tales from the Smoking Worm's back cover is a piece of bespoke art that Brad McDevitt did for me 2 years before the first issue came out, when we were just, conceptualizing what it should look like. It was that long ago, right? I literally that was the first piece of art I think I bought for Tales from the Smoking Worm.
For the contents page?
Yep. That back piece for the table of contents page. It was something that when Brian and I were sitting there talking about the concept of a tavern or a pub or something, and what would be the things you would need, and we were trying to brainstorm what the look of the zine would look like. We were like, well, you need, I don't know about you, but every time I go to an English pub, they have a wooden sign. Usually it has a chalkboard with, their specials and everything, chalked onto it. And I was like, we need, some kind of cool wooden sign, and we can make that the table of contents. So that was the first piece of art. And I've got a couple other pieces that came right after that, but well before we had the writing finished on the first issue, we had that piece.
And your poster is coming along, honest.
That's great. No, I'm looking forward to it. Brad's referring to another piece of art that I had him create bespoke, actually for an article that I'm in the process of writing right now. That'll come out.
Get off my butt and finish the damn poster.
We got a little bit of time, but yeah.
Did you want me to show it? I can get it right now.
Yeah, you want to pull it up? So this is an article that we're looking at writing on creating Starspawn as like dragons, right? Creating Starspawn monsters, and it's kind of a follow-up to the Shoggoth article that we did. And so Brad is giving us this will be the title page piece for it. If you come up a little higher.
Yeah, hold on. Why is my camera suddenly acting very weird? Is that showing it or not?
It's showing a part of it.
Yep.
Okay. It's a huge piece. It's like 11 by 17.
So this is a double page spread. It'll be massive in the zine. It'll really be a dominant piece. And as a matter of fact, more and more I find that a couple of dominant pieces are my go-to, and then I pull in clip art from it. Yeah, that's a beautiful piece, Brad. I can't wait to see it finished. So
it should be finished before I die of old age.
Well, great. I should get on finishing those rules then. So Ed, you've got an example of a bespoke piece that you purchased, right?
Yeah. So the cover for our first book, this is graphic 4C. I wanted a Roman soldier and an elf. And I searched high and low, and I'm sure you won't be shocked that I was not able to find an existing piece with that combination. So again, I saw an artist that on that Facebook group whose style I liked. I contacted and said, "Hey, I'd like to commission you to do this. This is what I'm looking for. How much would that cost?" He gave me a price. Just to and I guess just to start giving people a sense, so they have a ballpark. If I remember correctly, this piece cost me somewhere around $200, which was an actually a really good deal. Some of the other ones that I've had done have been more like twice that. But just to give you a sense of, for something that is a higher resolution in color and is going to be something that's suitable to put on a cover, those are going to be factors. So that was the first commission piece that I had done, and was very pleased with the results of that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. If you could pull up graphic 4D, this is a piece that actually is coming up in Tales from the Smoking Worm #4. This is the frontis pages, the two front pages for the troll article that we have, where we're detailing trolls as a character race, or a character class, I guess you could say. And so here I'm working with an artist. His name is Jay Tanaka. He's from Spain, and he's a phenomenal artist to work with. I really, really enjoyed working with Jay. Yeah, he always brings a fresh perspective to things. And what we did was we delivered the text. You can see trolls, the title. There's a Scandinavian poem there, and it's in Scandinavian and it's in English. And then the intro block of text. And this isn't finalized. This is what Jay has delivered to me, is a snapshot sketch. He actually delivered this in several phases, but this is the finished black and white line art sitting on top of the sample page layout that I sent him. And you can see there are gutter marks, and there's crop marks and bleed marks on here, and everything, so that Jay has a good understanding of where all of the things are going to fit on the page and what the limits of the page are. And this gives us so he sends this to myself and my layout designer, Caitlin. And so we can get a good sense of, is this going to work for us? And we see this we now actually have bespoke art. Whenever I'm working with people and we have the article done and in layout, they get the layout first, and then they can work around that. And so this is just a wonderful piece. This is not the final version of this. Jay later went in, because the highlight for the limited edition version of the Smoking Worm, the color is orange. And so he's gone in and put a whole bunch of orange highlights and stuff into this as well. So, and remember, I just saw that yesterday. It's phenomenal. I couldn't be happier. So, and I think Brad, you've got a piece, right? This is actually something you had on another Twitch show, right?
We're looking at 4H.
Yeah, 4H. Or I'm sorry. Sorry, I jumped.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did that for the Twitch show last week.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, this is just the sketch.
Oh.
But
Well, do you want to actually
what he would call a sketch?
and this is a great point, Brad. Can you talk about what this is and what it means to be a sketch? What are you delivering, and why do you produce a sketch before you go to the final piece?
Did we pull up E or H? Because we were looking at 4H for this.
Was it?
Sorry. Okay.
We must have gotten out of order there. I apologize.
No big deal. Okay. Generally, my jobs start with a work order from the art director, Matt Hildebrand, or whoever I have, whatever company I'm working on. And generally, they will give me a reproduction size, what size it'll be reproduced. So like that one, I think, is like 3.5 by 7.5. So I usually work at least a quarter larger to 1.5 larger. So work up a sketch. Well, first I'll do a box on my drawing paper up to the drawing size. Then I just read over the work order again, nail all the mental details, and then I just start working them up, try and figure out the most dramatic way and effective way to show the picture. And usually the work order has some sort of mention of like, we need to show this, this, and this in the picture. So that part of the job is just a matter of interpreting the words of the work order and turning them into a picture. I then scan that. Once I've got it all done, send it to the art director. Usually he will approve it, or we need to change this, this, and this. I will make those fixes if they feel necessary to see them. Resend, and usually it only takes about 1, maybe 2 at most, rounds of emails to get everything approved. And then it's off to the races with inks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good indication of what to come to expect when you're working, dealing with a commission artist. You should expect that there's going to be a process wherein there's a back and forth. The very first thing that they send you, hopefully, is going to be very rough to make sure that they're envisioning the same thing you're envisioning. And
I usually call that a thumbnail. And I
okay.
usually when I send it to the art director, I usually mark it TN so that they know this is just a thumbnail to give you an idea.
And so, Brad, when you produce that thumbnail, you're working off of something you call a work order, right? We've just started using work orders here at Blind Visionary and everything. So can you describe what goes on a work order? Is it laid out in a specific format? Obviously that may change by group that you're working with, but what are the salient pieces of information that need to sit on that work order?
Okay, the most salient part is size. Is it a quarter pager, a spottillo, a half page? Is it a full page or a spread like you quite often do? Because that's going to determine, one, how much you can show in the picture, and also the price. For example, if I'm asking for a quarter page illustration, I'm not going to be able to show more than a few details. If you say a full page illustration, well, I can go into a lot more details on stuff.
Yeah. And if you look closely at that piece of art, obviously you'll get to see it in press when Brad finally finishes it and I get the article done. But that's exactly what Brad is doing by working at that large scale. He's able to get in there and give really great detail. I mean, it was something he and I talked about at length about, the kind of the cosmos in the background, right? That Kirby-esque kind of style of moons and planetoids that have got craters and stuff on them and Kirby crackle and stuff. That was something that I specifically was asking for in that piece, if I remember correctly. And you got to work at a big size to get that stuff.
Yeah. Right? There's another wonderful detail working larger. Any minor mistakes you make just kind of get lost when you shrink it down to print size.
That's right. And the other thing that we often put on work orders now is whether the piece is a bleed or not, right? And
that's
so whether it's going to, so the artist knows this is going to bleed off the page. And actually, so we'll give the dimensions, this needs to be, say, 10 inches if it's going to run across 2 lower pages, and say by 10 inches by 3 inches, and it's going to have a 1/4 inch bleed. The artist knows that they need to go actually to 10 and a half and down to 3 1/4, because where it's positioned, it needs that much overlap off of the page and the reason why bleed is there is, for those of you who don't know, is it's there for when the print machine, when the printer is actually feeding through paper, there's some skew in that paper stock as it moves around. It's all collated and nice in the feeder, right? But when it's running through multiple mechanisms and it's got all these suction cups that are pulling it up and moving it around and everything, and static electricity is moving it from one drum to the next, sometimes those things don't work quite right. And that creates a skew on that page. And so the bleed is there so that if skew occurs and you want art to go all the way off the edge of the page, you're covered, right?
It's your margin for error.
Yeah. It's
You usually only need like an eighth or at most a quarter of an inch of bleed, but there you need to have it, because if you don't, you are risking, like, oh, it shifted an eighth of an inch. Well, an eighth of an inch doesn't sound like very much until you see that big, what looks like a huge white area at the top over the side of a page.
Right.
Yeah, and there are a couple of the things to think about that bleed when you're thinking about laying out your art. First of all, like as an artist, don't put your signature in the bleed area, right? Because it's going to get lost most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, different companies have different bleed requirements.
Mhm.
So I work with 3 or 4 different printers sometimes, and one of our printers is very accurate, and they only require a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch bleed. That's
Mhm.
phenomenal. There are other printers that require a 1/4 inch, and they'd like to see more sometimes. So their machines are recognizably sloppy in their printing efforts, right? And so that's something you need to take into account. And obviously, it's something you need to communicate to your artist.
I actually kind of cheat sometimes, because I actually have a Photoshop file of my signature, and sometimes I will just drop it into the final Photoshop or TIFF file as a separate layer, and I'll tell the art director, just move this around if you have to.
Yeah.
That way, if you needed to have it end up having it on the other side of the page to fit, hey, no problem. You don't have to worry about manipulating the master file. All you have to do is grab that layer, and it's
good to
kind
go.
of cheating, but hey, that's life.
Alana's indicating that we've got a question about bleed, and Alana, if you could pull graphic 4D up again, this is the one, the spread of the trolls. If you look carefully at the edges of this page, you'll see that there are 2 dotted lines right next to each other along all the edges.
Mhm.
The inner dotted line is the proposed cut mark, right? This is the size of the sheet, and the outer dotted line is the bleed, and that's the wastage space beyond the cut mark that allows for that skew to happen. And so you can see where this page could be a little bit off and still get printed just fine. And we've allowed for that. Now, it turns out in this piece, we don't have any bleed on this page, right? And as a matter of fact, if you look at Jay's art, it sits completely within the cut space, and everything. And so that's the difference between edge cuts or a cut space, cut line, and a bleed line. All right. If you also look down the center of the file, you'll see 2 dotted lines that look like they're about 1/2 inch apart. Those are the gutters. And those gutter marks are telling us that anything that's in that gutter could potentially not be seen, depending on the type of printing that you're using. And I'm sure we've overviewed that in the first 2 shows. Excuse me, but I'm sure we'll come back to it some other time too.
I did not think to do the gutter area for the Cthulhu poster. I hope that is not going to be a problem.
No, because the people we work with, the gutter is almost never an issue with those printers. And so, and they're not going to be bound. This is a choice issue, right? I do not like square bound publications. Now, if you look at most role playing books, they're square bound. That's just what it is. But they don't lay flat all the time. And I'm a big proponent of saddle stitched or saddle sewn, because of the possibility to lay flat. Or if when we eventually do a hardback book, they'll be Smith sewn in a textbook fashion, so that they are guaranteed to lay flat as well. And that lay flat ability, the ability for the pages to lay flat, it kind of makes the gutter not as important. But the gutter is really essential, especially when you've got these thick square bound books that are paperback. Think of your DCC softback, right? It has a serious bleed issue potentially, because it's 1.5 inches thick and it's a square bound book. So those are just things, technical issues you got to think about. I'm sure Ed and I will probably have an episode devoted to printing, and we can get into the weeds about that. But Alana, does that answer the question, do you think? All right, excellent. So after you get that work order, you give a thumbnail sketch. Brad always puts TN on it, which is a great thing to do, because you're clearly communicating what's going on. Usually then, Brad, you get feedback and you
Mhm.
produce a rough sketch, which is we gave a good example of that with was it 4H? No, 4E.
Yeah.
And then from there you get feedback again, and you move to your fine sketch.
Right.
This would be the final type of modification, right? And normally these are things that I've actually had artists say, "Hey, I'm willing to do 2 corrections on a sketch before we move to commitment,
Mhm.
or it's going to cost extra." Some artists don't have that problem. It just, you need to work with the artist, and it's something to ask in advance as to what, how that artist likes to work, right?
Yeah.
But after that, you iteratively move on to inking, and then
Mhm.
finally, that produces that nice black and white illustration, and then we move to coloration, which would be kind of the final step. Brad, can you tell us about that? I think you got some examples for us to look at.
Yeah, this is, I don't call this a step coloration. This is basically when I take it on, after I've got it all inked, cleaned up on the scanned, cleaned up on the computer, and then sometimes I will go in. If you look at fairly close at the Boswog or whatever it's called, the thing with the glowy eyes, I laid a white dot pattern that I have as a file over it to give it kind of that weird glow. Not just, most of the glow was just done with inking, but the actual physical, it kind of grays it out.
Yeah,
And
it was kind of an ethereal quality.
yes, it makes it look a little bit more ghostly, basically.
Yeah.
I can do it with line. I also have files for line work, different densities of dots. But I thought for this one, like a 20% white dot would work fine.
Now, is that a layer that you apply that's pre-generated and it's kind of automated, or is that something that you went in and did your own custom dots for your layers and stuff?
Basically, I just went into Photoshop, did like made an 8.5 by 11, 20%. I think that was like 20% black. Then converted to a bitmap in Photoshop with a, I forget what the exact name of the file option is, but it basically turns that 20% of black into basically a whole bunch of little dots. Then you save that and you're ready to go.
That is awesome.
It's seriously cheating, I know, but it's great.
The bottom line is it delivers the product that the customer is looking for. So
exactly.
So that's
also,
kind of the art process. There's a couple other things we wanted to talk about. It's important to realize, and we kind of got into that just a couple minutes ago, there's a real interaction between the physical product and your digital files, right? Mm-hmm. So when Brad was showing that progression of, kind of 4D, 4E, 4F, and 4G, the final product there is 4G, and that's what you see. And it's got the nice, kind of ethereal looking monster, and it's got the child and everything. That looks great on a digital file, and it's going to look great when you lay it out in your whatever layout software you're working with. But as you transition from digital to physical, there are some things that you should keep in mind when you're dealing with art that are really, really important, right? First of all, the printing process itself can really dictate ink coverage capabilities and whether or not ink covers in a solid pattern or in some kind of, dithered pattern.
Dithering.
Yeah, if it's dithered, is it random dithered, or is it line dithered, where it's really consistent, or is it just kind of like static snow? The other thing is I print in an offset press, but I also print with risographic printing, and risographic printing is known to create that kind of color saturation when you've got big splotches of color that's very reminiscent of comic books from the 70s and 80s and stuff, where everything's a little inconsistent, right? And that's actually a feature that they sell in risographic printing. It's one of the things that makes it feel like it's been handmade. And so you need to understand what printing process you're thinking you're going to use and whether that's going to best illustrate your art, because you're going to have this nice, pristine, sharp product. in a digital space, and it may not look great in a physical space. And I can give you an example of that. I don't have an illustration to pull up, but recently we've been looking at changing cover stock for the Smoking Worm. I love the Cordwain. It's got a great connection to old school TSR, but it doesn't risographic print very well. And so it has to do with the ceramic coating on the basically glazing on the surface of the page doesn't allow for the ink to soak in well. And so we were looking at different papers we might use, and I actually had the printer print about 20 copies extra when they were printing issue 3 of the cover on different cardstock, so we could specifically look at the sharpness and how those images looked against different colored backgrounds and stuff, right? Because paper isn't always just ultra white. Sometimes it's a little unbleached or not so bleached. So that paper can dictate clarity of the image and the amount of ink absorption, which has to do with the sizing layer that goes on the surface of the paper. There are other paper properties that can become important. Like I said, sizing, or what we call coating, clay versus chemical. Those are two things you can ask your printer about. What is the type of coating that's on this page, and will it help me, or will it interfere with the printing process when we get to it? The printer should know that, or they should be able to go back to the paper manufacturer and find out. And then they
Trevor,
should be able to, yeah.
We've got a question in the chat. Someone asking, are there any risographic printers you would recommend?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you just put in, well, for me, I just put in Rizzo because it knows it, but resolve.com is the risographic printer that I use. They're in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They're a small business. I love working with small businesses. There's only about 4 or 5 employees, and the amount of attention to detail and customer interaction is superb. And so I have an open line with them anytime, and we routinely go back and forth and test things and stuff, and everything. They're wonderful to work with. So there are others. And I've seen some, there's one in Canada that has a YouTube video, our web page. I forget where it was, but they spent a lot of time going over the risographic process, which I spent a lot of time watching those when I was first getting into Rizzo. But yeah, I would work with Resolve any day. And as a matter of fact, I'm scheduled to work with them in 2 weeks, and I've got 8 more printing things set up for next year that'll all go through them primarily. I do caution you on Rizzo printing. It is expensive, right? And so this is a premium type of printing process that you're looking for a very specific effect. It's awesome, and you should definitely explore it if you feel you can afford it, and feel that your customers who are going to get your zine can afford it. We only do the limited editions in that, and then we move to a standard edition eventually. And it has to do with reproducibility and a high per issue count, or per copy count price. Basically, it almost never goes down below half of what I charge. And so it's a really expensive printing process for me, but it does look gorgeous. Oh, it does. And it smells like, it's real ink, right? It smells like printing. I mean, it's like, if you look at the reviews of Smoking Worm, 90% of them are like, it smells like a real book. And it does. It is a real book. But it's not a real book that's been slick digital printed. It's a real book that's been handmade. And I sent out videos to if you go look at our Kickstarters, you can see them like actually tuning in the saddle stitching machinery and stuff like this, and hand stitching stuff and everything all the time. So they're a great place to work with. And the cool thing about Resolve that I would say, they're willing to explore and do new things. We have that fold out page in the limited editions that only exists because Rizzo is willing to do that, and that's an expense of time and technical quality. It takes effort to make that happen, and I can't get that in a mass market press like Mixam or something. So,
I'll give an example of implication that I ran into in terms of print and art, specifically. Or having particularly an impact with respect to color. So all of ours are printed through drive-through, and they use yeah, that's it, Lightning Source.
Yeah.
And at one point, they've got different levels of paper type that you can use. And at one point, the paper type that we had them using, Lightning Source changed the nature of their paper for that. And we got some proof copies, and the color, the stuff that we had that was in color, the graphics and the maps all of a sudden looked awful. And so we had to go back and retool the colors that we were using so that they wouldn't look muted when it went to that different type of paper. So you just, whether this is a matter of an exchange that you're having with the printer, or this might just be another dimension that is involved with when you're getting a proof copy that might add to that time that you're going to take, is how something looks in the digital copy in your your PDF that you send to the printer, and then how something looks when you have a physical copy sitting there. Maybe very different.
Yeah.
And you may need to make adjustments, and then over time you'll become used to, okay, with this printer I need to have these kinds of parameters so that my stuff looks decent, and then you'll have that worked out ahead of time. But your first time of dealing with any given printer and their paper and so forth and their process, that might be iterative for you to come to a sense of what are the things that I need to do with my work and the files that I send in so that it ends up looking sharp under those conditions.
Yeah, and again, that's dependent on the quality or the nature of the paper and its coating, its paper thickness, the whiteness, how bleached it is versus unbleached, and things like this. All of that, even the fibers. Is this a cotton rag, or is this only 25% cotton rag? Is this even paper, right? Are we actually dealing with a plastic? And there's plenty of plastic papers out there now that plenty of people can print on, and they produce incredibly sharp images, but they're plastic. So you're weighing all of those factors, or you can weigh all those factors as you're producing a product. So
and sadly, a lot of not terribly experienced publishers, and certainly not artists, are ever going to think through all of these, dozens of, gee, I have to think about this before I can go to press, which can become a major problem.
It's a real project management issue. I have to tell you, I learned a lot from a class I took in high school in graphic design, where we had to take a product from a rough sketch all the way to an AB Dick 360, I think it was, offset printer or silk screening and things like this. And that was a huge advantage. You're spending a lot of time working in a copy shop. I worked at a Kinko's for about 5 years, and those types of things that can only come sometimes with experience and detailed experience of very specific machines, many of which don't exist anymore. So don't think that it's a wonderful blessing. I got to jettison all that stuff, but the general principles kind of hold still, and they're really helpful. And so you can get a lot of that. You can ask for advice on a lot of that on the RPG Zines Facebook group, which we've highlighted before as well. But I think kind of the end message we want to give you guys is, if you're going to work with bespoke art, right? If you're going to have somebody craft something for you, you need to reach out to them early. You need to expect that there's going to be a certain amount of time. And, I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to negotiate and outline on the work order. I need this artwork, Brad, by X date. Now, when Brad and I worked on the piece he showed you, I didn't set a date. We just said, this is a background piece. I know it's for an issue upcoming. Whenever you get it done, we want it to be great.
And one reason I am taking so long on it, I'm trying to make this, and I'm probably setting myself up for failure. I'm trying to okay, if Bernie Wrightson were drawing this, and he were trying to do something like one of his Frankenstein pieces, how would he be doing it? I'm probably basically shooting myself in the foot trying to aim that high.
Well, I always appreciate that. So, and I'm a huge Bernie Wrightson fan as well. As you know, I've got a couple pieces here in the background that you might be able to see, although I've got them
kind of darkened. Actually, I have two of his pictures right above my monitor right now, kind of glaring at me all the time of Are you drawing to the highest level you can, Brad? Like,
So a couple of things that I want to add in terms of the experience of dealing with getting a commission. One of the things, and Trevor kind of touched on this a bit in some respect, but I would also want to add, when you're planning out where this piece is going to go, whether it's going to be interior or it's going to be your cover, and you're taking bleed into account. In other words, you're understanding that the edge, if this is going to be something that's going to go to the edge, and if it's a cover, it's by definition almost always going to be going to the edge. And sometimes, with some of mine, I have them wrap around front and back.
mm-hmm.
And so it's going to spill past the edge. Make sure in your communication with the artist that you express, one, what that is, but also express, hey, I'm going to have my title in this area and it's going to be this color. And so they can plan where they're going to be putting things within the work so that it's not likely to get cut off in the bleed, or that it's going to fit well. If, for example, if it is your cover, that there's going to be a good space for your title to go, and that whatever color they are going to have in that zone is going to be something that provides good contrast with the color you're planning to use for your title text. So have a sense of what your layout is going to be, whether the artwork is going on the cover or the inside. Have a sense what the layout is going to be, and discuss that layout with the artist so they can take those things into account. And that's the physical layout, and in some cases the color implications of the layout. These things matter. One other thing that I'll bring up, just because it came up in an offline discussion that we had. There may be cases where you contact a commission artist that you find through one of these routes, and you're like, hey, I want you to make this thing that's just like Larry Elmore. Well, then contact Larry Elmore. I mean, the artist you are contacting has their style.
Yeah.
Find someone whose style you like. That's why you're contacting them, and expect that they're going to produce it in their style.
It's a grave insult.
Sure.
I haven't worked at this for over 40 years so that I can pretend to be Larry Elmore. Just thought I would show this. Talking about cover layouts. I don't know whether you can see this that well, but you need to leave a fair amount of room at the top for the title, and you also have to leave some room at the bottom, which is, you can put stuff down there, just don't put anything terribly relevant, because it might get covered by text, company logos, stuff like that.
Yeah, and you're going to want to have the, don't forget, you're going to want to have the third-party DCC compatibility icon or graphic, which has stipulations of where that's going to need to show up. And so likewise, communicate that to the artist that, hey, I'm going to have these important things in this space.
Right.
So,
and you need a plan for that. Plan for 3/4 of an inch square to an inch square for that, depending on how big you want it to be. Remember, you only get that compatibility logo when Goodman Games has approved your item. So you can't really find it online. This is something that I had to have sent to me, and I'm sure it's the same way with you. And so, but once you have it, then you can kind of plan for it. As a matter of fact, what we did on our covers, because I've got some really great dynamic artists who do covers for me, they would have things going on everywhere. And we finally had to produce kind of 3 styles of cover and say, we're either going to have the title up high, or it's going to be down low, and it's going to be in these formats. And this is what the front and back are going to look like. And so that we could just hand those to the artists, and they could make a choice of which of those 3 styles they wanted to work with that would fit best for the art they were going to produce. And so, we kind of build templates, I've found, and that helps a lot. And so, especially if you can send it to them as a PDF, and they can print it out, and they can do those sketches right on the template and say, hey, this is how this is going to work. And then if you see a problem, don't forget to communicate it, right? It's entirely possible to kind of weave text through art and stuff like this now,
Mhm.
and digitally kind of make new layers and everything, and it adds depth. It's something that my designer Caitlin is really good at, and she'll go in and add depth and put a title behind a tentacle, but then before the monster in the back and stuff like this, and it adds depth to it. And so, but by having those thumbnail sketches and everything, like Brad showed you, that allows you to think about that in ways that you probably weren't thinking about initially, and then adapt to it. Brad, you got an example?
Yeah, like I have a chunk of girder that the one character is holding, and it actually, if you notice, it is actually in front of some of the text. Now,
Yeah.
you got to be really careful when you're doing this that you don't obscure too much of the text. You have to retain legibility.
So that can all be done in Photoshop now, whereas before you would be reliant upon your mock-up artist, right? That's a person who would have a whole bunch of wax machines, and they'd be running cardstock, photocopies and printouts through there, and then hand cutting them and then laying them out in layers to get that to work. If you think of like old comic books, I'm thinking of X-Men 136, or something like that, where the X-Men logo is shattering and it's kind of falling down the page, right? And that comes down to an artist literally cutting those into pieces and laying them on top of the art. That can all be done digitally now. And
sounds like a major pain in the tailbone.
Yeah, but I mean,
it was
what used to take hours, you can do in seconds. And so, I mean, I my first year of college, I was a physical paste up specialist for the campus newspaper. It was the last year they ever did physical paste up, and so I spent the entire year pasting up newspapers, and I learned a lot. But you can't even find those machines anymore.
Oh no, they've gone the way of actual letters.
Yeah, that's right.
Typesetting.
So that's a rare commodity too. Yeah, but cool stuff. Is there anything else, Brad, that you wanted to talk about, or things that we might not have hit upon?
I was just thinking the actual dealing with the artists. Don't forget, guys, we're just human beings too. And, we might quite often, we have other jobs we have to do. Even if we're a full-time commercial illustrator, we may be juggling 3, 4, 5 jobs at a time. There was one time I think I realized that I was working on 9 different projects at the same time, which is never a good idea.
That can be really rough. And natural, I mean, human problems show up, right? And this is something you need to expect from artists, not just artists, writers, layout people. Everybody has this. I mean, I have an artist right now that we're working with that we're really super excited to work with. And they let us know the other day that they had to go in for emergency surgery on their hand, right?
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, well, I hope everything goes okay. So, please let me know if this is going to be a problem, but I hope you're okay. And, I mean, and it delayed things by a couple of days. It wasn't a major issue, but life happens, right? I think he said he got in a hand caught in a bicycle, and so, accidents happen, and you need to be able to work around that too.
One of Goodman Games' old graphic design people, one of the books ended up being delayed by several months because he had been skateboarding and fell and broke his arm.
That'll slow you down.
And this really emphasizes something that we've talked about a couple of times. Understand in terms of project management. Your whoever's handling project management for a production or for a publication, part of that understanding is going to be if you're doing some kind of commission work arrangement, start that very early. Understand it's going to take time. Work out that time expectation with the artist, but then also plan into it, just like anything else, just like your writing stages and various other things. Plan in that there are various things like communication issues. Oh, I thought what you meant was this, and so therefore such and such happened. Always give yourself some time buffer to with the understanding that all of these pieces, just like if you're doing your writing for your book, Just like your writing takes time, artwork takes time. Everything that's being done that involves a skill takes time.
Mm-hmm. And especially doing something creative involves not just time and skill, but also motivation. As we were joking in the pregame, sometimes you get up in the morning and your muse has left a note on your studio door, gone fishing. I'll be back when I'm back. I think I said something slightly more impolite, but I think that gets the point across.
Yeah. I think, Ed, it might be really cool to do an episode later, not necessarily the next one, on how you deal with the muse and how you deal, whether as a writer, as an artist, or whatever, how you can get past things like writer's block and stuff. I think that would be a great one. I've definitely come up with a couple of techniques myself that, they're tried and true. But it's a great question, because I often get stuck on things, or
maybe I personally find that looking at the stack of bills with bill overdue, I find that's a great motivation. My muse will start talking to me very quickly at that point, or my wife will stop talking to me.
There you go.
All right. Well, folks, unless there's any last minute things that you want to add on, I think we've gone a bit past our expected time frame, but I think our audience has been engaged, and so I think that's been just fine with them. But I think we want to be bringing this to a close here soon. So I'll pass it to each of you guys if there's any last minute things that you wanted to tack on.
Yeah. You know what? Why don't I throw a couple things in the hat, and we'll hand it to Brad to take us out. I guess the first thing I really want to say is, and it's something we haven't touched on, don't be afraid to change things once you start working with, custom art artists. I can't tell you the number of times that an artist has come back with something that is just absolutely perfect for a piece that I'm writing, but means that I have to make changes to the writing. And I am absolutely not afraid to do that. And so be prepared for the unexpected, and be prepared to have a great time working with other professionals and other creatives. I think it's a wonderful process, and I have enjoyed just about every interaction I've had with an artist. They're a lot of fun to talk to. They're a lot of fun to work with. And there is nothing like opening my phone or opening my email and having a finished piece, or even a great sketch sitting in my inbox. And I'm just like, boom, mind blown. That's going to look awesome.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And similarly, to what you were saying about changes based on your interaction, or what you're bringing in terms of art. Yeah, I totally second that. Let the artwork that you're engaging for your piece, let that bring you some inspiration too. The cover, like I mentioned, I showed earlier, the cover that I came across for the Celts book, and I saw this graphic and I just fell in love with it. And that graphic actually was inspiration for one of the legends that I wrote, one of the folklore legends that I wrote that went in the book. So yeah, when you have found a piece, or you're commissioning a piece and you get this work, let that inspire you too, and let that influence the nature of your work. Brad?
I don't know what else to add to that, other than, always strive to go above and beyond what the, text of a short work order says. If, the work order, for just to pull an example out of a hat, calls for a column in the picture, maybe if it's supposed to be like a horror piece, draw something horrible at the top, some horrible sculpture coming down the end, the column. You could just, whip out a quick column and be done with, but it would make the picture that much richer if you strive. So always strive to do something more. You'll be more satisfied. Your client will be ecstatic, obviously. and everyone will be happier. And from a purely mercenary viewpoint, if you go above and beyond as an artist what the client expects, they'll remember you and they'll come back to you.
Mhm.
And happy customers are a wonderful thing.
And they're good advertisement too.
Well, yeah.
Here.
All right, folks.
That's all I have to say.
We thank you so much for joining us for this episode. The nature of future episodes we haven't really worked out, and so that's going to be a just keep a lookout, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Everybody, have a great evening. Have a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future. Brad, thank you
Happy
so much.
holidays.
I always enjoy our conversations. And Alana, thank you for your behind the scenes work.
Yes, let's hear it for Alana for her
Let's hear
hard
it for
work
Alana.
keeping this process moving. Yes,
right.
thank you. All right,
All right,
good night,
everybody.
folks.
Have a great night.